Hi, everybody. Bill Kenny here with Test My Pitch. I hope you're doing really well. I hope you like this guy with the funny expression over my shoulder. Anyway, uh, so we're here for the performance paradox, how to drive results while conserving resources. And we're so glad you're here with us today. This should be a really good program. We invite you to ask questions. You should have access to the ability to ask questions, whether you're viewing us from YouTube or Google Plus. If it's not revealed on your right-hand side, you probably have a variety of icons towards the top right of your screen. There should be one that is sort of a square with a bunch of small dots or boxes that comprise a square. That should reveal your question fields so that you can ask any questions. And again, we invite you to do that as we're going along. I'm now on screen, which you can hopefully see. I'm going to go off screen and reveal some slides here, and then towards the tail end of the program, I'm going to come back on screen and we'll get into the Q&A part, and also several of you have submitted some great questions, which I'll show you in just a moment. But let me go and go to my slideshow here, and this may take me just a second, but we'll get there. One second. And let's see. So you should now see, I'm just going to go to my slides. And you should see my slides on your screen. I'm just going to go to presentation mode here. And they're just loading up. It'll just be a moment. So again, our topic today is the performance paradox, how to drive results while conserving resources. We've seen this challenge with many organizations, and actually just to share with you sort of a view of Aristotle about this, what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is an act, or not an act, but a habit. And so this is really what we're focused on today, is how do we help develop the organizational and institutional habits that cause excellence. And so thinking about our audience today, we've really got actually three general personas. We have managers who are working to get the maximum performance out of their teams. So some sales managers, we've got educators who are looking to engage and inspire students, and then we have folks that run mentor type programs, everything from business accelerators and incubators and so on. And ultimately there's sort of a thread here, a common theme, in that each of our goals is to inspire and engage the folks that we work with, the folks that work for us or that we're serving, to a place of maximal performance, to a place where they sort of optimize what they can do and in the end perform as well as they can. And it's funny how people that perform better tend to have a lot more fun and stay a lot longer. And so this is besides being the idea that we want to get performance to create our results, more than anything else we want to get performance to retain the best people and give and to attract even more and better people. And our best promotion for our organization is going to be the people we attract. So and doing that well is certainly a fantastic art. So let's hop into things here. And these are the questions that you've all submitted. Again, I'd encourage you, as we're going along, to feel free to submit additional questions. We're going to pace through this agenda. So we're going to talk a little bit about the background of performance, and particularly as relates to the three personas here on the call. And we'll talk about the challenges that they face, the opportunities and steps to success, and then we're going to get specifically to your questions as well. And And again, encouraging you to add additional questions to the list. We're happy to address as many as you want. So just so there's some context here, a little bit about me. I'm the founder of Test My Pitch. I've founded 6 companies. I've also, with my wife, bought and sold a couple others. So we have a pretty good experience at running sales teams. We've been through a variety of business accelerators and incubators. We talk to people that run organizations and serve a variety of employee types and client types all around the world every day about these types of issues. We certainly, and sort of the disclaimer here is we haven't seen it all, but we're certainly more than glad to share what we've seen, and hopefully there's some things in what we're going to share that will be helpful for you. Just so you understand what we do today, and this is not intended to be a commercial, again, the point is really to give you context. We have 2 tools that comprise what we call the Test My Pitch platform. The Test My Pitch tool itself is probably analogous to if you took Toastmasters or the notion of Toastmasters and put it online. It is a platform that helps develop communication skills of students, of entrepreneurs, and of professionals. And the real goal is to help people perform much better when they get into situations where there's a high expectation of communication competence. And so what we tend to see is that, unfortunately, the best feedback on communication doesn't happen until someone asks for money. And unfortunately, then it's just way too late to do anything about it. So we're the Test My Pitch platform solves that issue. And then Score My Pitch is a pitch event judging and feedback system. So the whole goal of it is to capture the wisdom in the room that happens at all different types of feedback or at all different types of pitch events, and to make to contextualize that feedback so that who's ever receiving it can perform much better the next time they do it. More than that, the tool also provides highly reliable scoring and judging. So we have organizations that are using it for making entrance decisions, funding decisions, for really all different types of things besides the educational value of improved feedback. Certainly ask any questions about that. We're happy to share more and do demos and so on. So let's get into the performance paradox. So to share a little bit about the background here. So when we think about organizations and management or managers' success, whether it's the organizations or the managers or executives or ownership, only succeeds when the people that they serve succeed. And so that could be employees, that could be cohorts, that could be students. It really is, it doesn't really matter. But ultimately, and this is just, we want to keep it super simple, the only way that we as owners or organizations or managers succeed is when the people that serve us and that we serve succeed. And so we need to make sure that that comes first. And that's sort of our kind of where we're aiming with this. And we're going to come back to this theme probably a few times, because we want to keep aligned with that idea. And in fact, besides the sort of creating our own success, we really have a responsibility to make sure that the people that work for us or that we serve succeed. And so we're gonna keep on that theme and make sure that we keep moving down that road. So let me just advance to the next slide here. And so that what we'll find is that organizations really have 3 things that they provide. Number one is, and I should say provide in order to accomplish team or individual success. Number one is that they provide resources. This could be wisdom, such as Yoda here, or it could be tools, and there are a variety of different types. So wisdom, it could be resources, or I'm sorry, it could be mentorship. It could be all different types of resources that are there. So organizations provide these resources, again, to evolve and to drive individual and team success. Next, the organizations provide structure. So the interesting thing about organizations, and all organizations have at least some history, some have a lot of history. So structure is really about how do we give or paint white lines in the road, and these may be metaphorical white lines that help individuals, whether they're coming into our system or performing in our system or have been performing in our system for a long time, how do we help them get to the destination they're going easily? Now, right now on the screen, we're looking at a roadway, and the kind of amazing thing to me about roadways is that we have all these cars in incredibly close proximity, probably going at fairly good rates of speed. And these are, several thousand-pound weapons, essentially. And they're able to navigate to their individual destinations quite successfully by adhering to some basic rules, right? We've got cars going in opposite directions in this image, again, going at probably a fairly good speed. We actually have a car pulled over here on the left-hand side of the image who maybe they weren't following the rules, and so they got pulled over. But organizations need to provide this type of structure in order to help people optimize their performance. The idea that sort of everybody can find their own way and we can be laissez-faire, well, you may be seeing how that's working. And it's very rare that organizations can be, and sort of make your own Sunday and be successful. There needs to be a process and a plan. And as people mature, you might find that you can allow them to sort of make their own roads. But more often than not, what you're going to find is as they devolve their skills or results or whatnot, then they need to come back onto the road and so that they can find their way. If we sort of have a reference point, imagine wherever you are today. I'm in lovely Connecticut, and I kind of think about, gosh, that's what if I were trying to go to New York, and sort of how do I get there if I were going to drive? Well, gosh, I'm going to get on the road. I'm going to get on certain roads. If I go on the wrong roads, I shouldn't expect to go to New York. And so I'm going to get from where I am, I'm going to get on I-95 and I'm going to go south. And I know at whatever speed I go at on I-95, I will eventually get to New York. I can't help it. And that's the kind of how we want to develop organizational and individual systems so that we set people up for success. So the third thing that organizations provide is they provide privileges. And so these privileges can come in a variety of flavors. They could be, the privilege of working from home. It could be the privilege of access to certain, cool opportunities like baseball tickets or whatever they might be that an organization would provide that somehow is perceived as a significant benefit of being a part of the organization. All important. So let me just advance here to the next slide. There we go. And so organizations, as they look at these resources, they over time can develop significant performance challenges. And this comes from, number one is they sometimes will feel obliged or compelled to equally distribute their resources. And that's generally a recipe for failure, because they're not all performers are equal or will perform equally or are going to put in an effort to create equal results. And so we want to make sure that we understand how to distribute those resources in a way that will both inform and educate and also create the appropriate results. Organizations also are challenged because there is either a lack of structure or a lack of will to enforce the structure, or both. And so, we're here at the smash up or crash up derby, whatever you like to call it. And this challenge can be amazingly problematic, in that we kind of went from that road with the white lines on it, where it was easy to stay in bounds and get to New York. I am not sure from this picture how anyone would get to New York. They can't. They sort of, it's not really possible. And coupled with that is the will to enforce the structure. So there are certainly some organizations that have structure. They know what to do. They have the history of understanding their best practices and so on, and the sort of pathway to the appropriate success or performance. But there are certainly examples of where the will to enforce the structure fails, and I'll actually give some examples of that as we go. And then the third and kind of final challenge here is where privileges evolve from being privileges to becoming entitlements, and that is absolutely a challenge, because the idea that these privileges now become sort of assumed, then they become challenging to take away at some point if that becomes appropriate. And so we want to make sure that our languaging stays consistent and in fact that these are earned, not given or assumed, or should be assumed that they're always going to be there. And so privileges are just that. They're something that we have to earn. And we certainly want to resist the idea that they ever become entitlements. So how do we sort of take these challenges and move them to a place of success, and recognize the opportunity that lies within? So we've got 5 steps that I think will help you quite a bit, and certainly we're very interested in your questions. So again, make sure you're submitting them. Just so you know, I won't see them until I go back to viewing you, or you can view me. So if you are submitting any, I will get to them then. So the first step to success is that success and what it is needs to be clear and defined. And so the idea here is that in so many organizations that we see, what success is, isn't at all clear. And most people, if you went and talked to, whether it was employees or individual team members or whatnot, people would have a hard time telling you what success is, and how the organization defines success for them. And number one is, when the success in leadership communication is really defined by the ability for team members to be very clear in terms of where they're going and how they relate to the organization. And so how we're going to identify these goals and outcomes is really by using the SMART process, which is really key here. So any goal or outcome we set needs to be specific, it needs to be measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So specific, we're going to not be vague in terms of what we describe. We're going to say this, we want, sort of after the 3rd month, we want $50,000 in income. So that's time bound, it's specific, it's measurable. Whether it's achievable and realistic, obviously is situational. We need to understand sort of what the parameters are there and whatnot. But the idea is that there's no ambiguity about what we're trying to accomplish. And so it's really twofold here. One is having no ambiguity, and then 2 is making sure that we are very democratic in how we share that information. So it shouldn't be something that's hidden. It should be something that is on the walls. It's in every communication so that people see what our destination is. Where are we trying to go to? Are we trying to go to New York? Well, everybody should have New York in mind in terms of where not only the organization is going, but where they should be aiming towards. The idea being that no matter what, when the lights are off, when no one else is around, each person should have a real clarity in terms of where we're going. Another way to think of this is that it's our true north. It's where we're going, and again, it's very easy for anyone involved in the organization to know where we're going and what we're doing. So if we have that kind of clarity, we've really covered the first step. The second step is to, once we've identified the goal or outcome, then align the resources with that goal or outcome and the needs of the team or individuals who are within our purview. And so we want the resources to support the accomplishment of that goal or outcome in the best way and most efficient way possible for the needs of the team. And so we want to, not only get those resources, acquire them, but we also want to align them with that outcome. So this might be a set of tools, anything from software to hardware to, just anything that will support the accomplishment of those outcomes. And it may be, we all operate in different budgets, so it may be that we can just have a few of them, and that we acquire others as we go along. But the point really is that we need to make decisions about which resources will help best support the outcomes we're looking for. And then, of course, there's also time. Besides those assets, time is also a huge asset. So whether it's a manager or whether it's a program director or whatever, or a mentor, or any of those resources need that time needs to be allocated in a way that it is used most effectively and efficiently to create the greatest possible outcomes for the organization. So we want to make sure that we align those resources with the outcomes. So then step 3, defining a clear path to success. So it's one thing to know we're going to New York. It's another thing to identify the route we're going. And it's really two totally different things. So we're going to New York. We now have resources. We've got a tool. Maybe we have someone who's going to ride shotgun for us. Maybe we've got some refreshments to drink along the way, so we can stay on the road and stay alert and attentive. And then we better figure out what road it is we're going to take. And so we want to define the path. And so what are the, as we look at this, it's probably best to look back. And so when we think historically about our best performers, what have their habits and skills been? Did they start at a certain time? Did they do a certain number of dials? Did they have a certain number of meetings? There could be lots of habits that our best performers have had. And ultimately, we want to catalog those, because that should become our sort of template system, or at least our preliminary system. And as time goes on, we can certainly adjust it. But the point really is we have to start with a system, and then what skills do they need and did they have in terms of things that made them a better performer? What separated them from everybody else? Maybe they had better communication skills, better listening skills. Maybe they were better time managers. And so, ultimately, it's understanding that. And the funny thing is, and we see this all the time with organizations, is many have had great performers, and so that they continue to have to relearn what creates good performance. And so if an organization isn't really clear about what creates good performance, it's very hard for people to perform well, because everybody will find their own path, and not prioritizing individual success can really act to the detriment of an organization. And this can happen in a variety of ways. So if you look at sports as a great example of this. So if you look at, let's just say a basketball player within a basketball team, good basketball players generally started practicing their skills when they were very young. They took shot the ball hundreds and thousands of times a day and a week in their backyard, building up the skill of being able to put the ball in the hoop. And that continued to being able to dribble, to being able to integrate those skills in a team environment and so on. And so, there's not a lot of mystery about what it takes to become good at basketball. You don't become good at basketball by watching basketball. That may be one of the things you do, but ultimately, if you never get on the court and go through the process of shooting and playing and so on, you'll probably never be very good at playing basketball. And so the same thing happens in any discipline. If we don't have a clarity in terms of the road we're going to take to get to the outcomes we want, and the habits and behaviors of someone who has achieved that outcome, then we shouldn't expect to get there. We're going to be going to some other destination, and managers and executives and folks that run programs, it's our responsibility to make sure that our number one responsibility is individual and team success. And that's only going to happen if we know that road to success and are able to articulate it and are confident enough in the road in order to help people realize that's going to be the best way. Not the only way, but until they find their way, our way is going to be the easiest way to be successful. And if they need to refine those skills, coming back to our way is going to be the best way to do it, because we've seen more and more examples. And again, we don't need to relearn how to get to New York. We know how to get there. So let's just get on the road and go. And so this becomes the playbook. This becomes how you onboard new people. It becomes how you re-engage and reinvigorate people who are not necessarily optimally performing, who maybe been around for a while. And so we want to make sure our playbook is easily accessible and that it's clear this is how we're going to call the plays and get to that destination. So step 4 is then to allocate the resources and privileges based on performance and compliance. And so depending on where someone is in our in our system, we're going to sort of do a few different things. So maybe the easiest way to maybe back away from this for a second is to think about the Pareto principle. Some know it better as the 80-20 rule. In this context, what we're really saying is that 80% of our results are coming from 20% of our performers. And so imagine, and this seems to hold true in many organizations, and it may not be the 100% rule, but the idea here is that, why then are we, one of two things is happening in most organizations. Either they're spreading their resources evenly across all performers, or they're actually investing the inverse. They're investing 80% of their efforts in the bottom 20% of performers. And so they're getting really dramatically hamstrung results. They're really underperforming because of how they're investing their resources. And so it's really about how do we make the decisions and create a system that allows us to easily and transparently allocate our resources, our privileges, all those things based on how people are performing. And it's either going to be their results or their compliance. If they're early in our program, it may be their compliance. If they're underperforming, it may be their compliance. And then, of course, if they're more mature, then it may be that we're just measuring or looking at their results, which is we want to simplify things. We want to enable and empower people to be independent performers. The longer they're dependent, the less we're leading, the more, unfortunately, then we're getting into managing, which is a lot less fun. So what normally happens, and this is probably a more complex image than I need for the point I'd like to make. So when we think about people that are entering our system, and maybe they're a new rep, maybe they're just joining our program in some in some way, they're new to the cohort or whatever, what we're going to find is there has to be some kind of an onboarding process. Their skills, their knowledge, their habits need to be built in order for them to perform well, in order for them to reach the goals that they want, in order for them to get to New York. They need to understand the system, they need to internalize it and begin actioning it. And so we want to set them up for success. We want to help them understand the white lines that they need to drive between in order to get to that successful outcome. This is our responsibility. Doing anything less than this, we're shirking our responsibility to them and in terms of helping them be successful. What normally happens as people mature, of course, we expect their performance to optimize or get close to optimal. But it's not unusual that people plateau in all different types of programs, whether again they're an employee or they're in some other type of program, be it educational, be it acceleration, whatever that might be. They tend to. There's a variety of things that happen, but they're going to plateau. They may actually fatigue a bit, and results go down. And then hopefully there's some intervention and their performance goes back up. And ultimately, whatever system we build needs to not only accommodate that person who's new into the program and get them onboarded and ramped up quickly, but we also need to accommodate the person who is going to plateau or even wane in terms of their performance. And again, it's the responsibility of our system to be able to do that, to be able to get them back between the white lines on the road to New York so that they'll be successful. And again, doing anything less than that means that we're not doing our job as leaders and as managers. And so we need to make sure we built this into the system, and it's how we do it. And again, sort of going back to sports analogies, you think of situations where players are no longer performing optimally. It would be a rare day that a very good team would continue to play an underperforming player. That just doesn't happen. That player, whether they go into a batting slump or whatever it is that they're deficient at, they go into a system that helps them relearn, that goes back to the basics and helps them get back onto track and performing well. And the funny thing is, I was with an organization for a while where where they didn't do that, where essentially when somebody stopped performing well, they were let go, and it was sort of our Darwinian thing. And so what you ended up finding is that this organization just had incredible turnover. They lost their institutional knowledge. The people who were performing well, the few that were, really just performed well, but they did it without a lot of resources. And actually, we're going to get into another topic where I'll talk about this company again, and where it created some other challenges as well. So we want to create a situation where resources and privileges are earned, and they're continuing to be earned. So we're going to, early when we're onboarding and ramping up, we're going to invest. We're going to sort of apply resources, training, manager time, director time, all those types of things to cause it's almost like a chemical reaction. There's a lot of energy that goes in up front to create a chemical reaction. There doesn't need to be nearly as much energy in many cases to sustain that reaction or that action. And so the easiest way to think of this is where we set up stage gates, or you might think of them as micro goals, and that we're getting sort of people to, where our investment in people or the folks going through our program increases as they pass or as they accomplish these micro goals or pass these stage gates. And so we might give them access to more resources. This might be more mentorship. It might be more support of any kind as they sort of pass these. This not only creates compliance, but it also somewhat gamifies the process, but it holds people accountable to those standards, and it also gives them a very easy to see and recognizable destination, and kind of breaks it up into small bites, which can be really helpful when you're onboarding folks. The other thing is we want to allocate the privileges based on those the accomplishment of those micro goals and stage gates as well. So again, if there's some flexibilities like working from home or dress casual or whatever the privileges in your organization happen to be, that those should be allocated in bits, small bits, with each accomplishment of a micro goal or the passing of a stage gate. And so this is important to consider when you're onboarding. It's also important to consider with the ongoing team. And so we want to make sure that as folks plateau or results diminish, that we again, as managers, set them up for success, that we have a system that immediately acts to help get them back, whether it's retrained, refocused, to essentially enable and empower their success. And so the easiest way that we can do the antithesis of that, depower their success, and really that can be very counterproductive. I'll go back to this sort of organization I was talking about. Is the weird thing about what they did is probably the worst thing they did was that they had set all these standards, just like we had talked about earlier. They had very clear standards of how people were supposed to perform to be successful. But they had absolutely zero, I mean like zero, if there was a way to say negative in this, they had zero will to enforce it. And so there was a spiral of things that happened. So the first thing that happens is that the people who are performing well generally, until they plateau or whatnot, generally continue to perform well because that's just how they're motivated. They get it, they move forward. But as people plateaued, they would essentially get rid of them. They did evolve over time, though, to no longer getting rid of people. They actually lost the will to do that even. And so they had these people who are mediocre performers amongst the good performers. And the good performers started seeing these individuals getting the same privileges that they had, that they assumed and that they were told were privileges of good performers. And so the good performers started performing less well, and they were less motivated because they knew, at least evidence so far had been, that if they didn't perform well like the others were, they would continue to get those privileges and resources. And that lack of alignment was challenging. A really good book, if you want more on this topic, it's called The Speed of Trust. It's written by actually Stephen Covey. It's actually Stephen, it's not Junior, he has a different middle initial, but it's Stephen Covey's son, Stephen R. Covey's son, and the gentleman who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. But if you read The Speed of Trust, what you're going to learn about, and it's really a phenomenal book, is that when we set up standards and we make them public, we have to hold to those standards, and anything that we do that somehow undermines that, such as continuing someone's access to resources and privileges that heretofore were only to be given to people who are at sort of certain levels, we begin losing trust of individuals, and it happens very quickly. We lose trust really quickly when we do that. So it's important that we are really predictable in this way, and that we are really congruent with that belief system and have the will to do it. And Stephen Covey goes into several examples, both in business and also actually with children, and uses examples in his own family about how when essentially he and his wife haven't sort of held to the standards, the children's behavior changes. And when you think about your responsibility, whether it's as a parent or as a manager, or as a program executive, again, we want to educate, we want to exit, we want to have a team that is highly independent, highly able to be successful on their own, and the only way that we do that is to help them learn that path, and also at times maybe relearn that path. Again, going back to sort of the sports analogy, can you imagine those low performers continuing to play on a highly successful team? Imagine people showing up late for practice or not showing up for practice. It's very rare that you see a team that performs well where that is enabled even once, or even for a short time. And so think about that as you think about sort of how do you do this in your organization. It's really, I think first really by having a meeting with the team and saying, I know over time we sort of accepted these things, but we need to change that, and here's why we need to change that. And it's not on you. This is not something that we're holding you responsible for, but we've been underperforming as managers and leaders. We haven't been helping you and supporting you to a place where you're able to be as successful as possible, because whether it's your compensation depends on that success, or your continuance here in terms of employment is part of that success, or whatever it might be. Our job is to help give you the best path to success. And so we need to change how we're doing things, and being very transparent, very open about those types of changes. And it's not impossible, if you lost the will at some point, to refine the will and reinstitute the will to do these things. But it's just about being upfront with people in terms of, sort of the cheese is moving, and we all need to be considerate and understanding in terms of why that cheese is moving, and how do we adjust to make sure that we continue to perform well. And again, our job is to help others perform well. So here's just a quick example of how stage gates can be used, and I'm just going to share sort of one client story with you. And this actually happens to be a business accelerator. We've seen the same examples in companies. We've seen the same examples in a variety of different types of organizations, but this particular example is in a business accelerator. So they have, this particular accelerator is one that is recognized worldwide. They exit some of the best companies and ones that go on to achieve some pretty amazing things. And they are really clear on a variety of things. So first and foremost, the expectations for entrance. They've got a rigorous process that identifies the organizations, the ventures that get into their program. The same can be done for team members, for staff, and so on. We want to have a very rigorous process. We want to hire slow, and as they say, fire fast. Two really hard things to do: hire slow and fire fast. Most of us find that to be a really hard thing to do. Usually, when we're hiring, we're in need, and sometimes high need, and sometimes when we should let go, we don't, because we still have that need, and we somehow believe we can change people. But so that this particular program has 3 distinctive stages, and at each level, and when I say stages, I mean stage gates, where you literally pass through an opening to another stage. And this organization, to give you a sense, as you mature to the next stage, you actually move to a different location in the building. So they've not only made it where it is sort of metaphorical, they made it so it's really physical as well. So in order to get to these other stages, you need to perform better. And as you do, there will be more support available, and you'll have additional privileges. Now, if you go backwards at all, or if you're not as diligent, or whatever happens, you plateau or whatnot, um, you'll see a reduction in support and privileges. And so again, this organization is confident enough in what they've learned over time to know a path, and they get people moving down that pathway. And again, as people mature, they're able to self-determine much more, as long as they're performing to the expected level, as long as they're hitting the milestones. Then sort of the much more liberty is given. But again, as performance wanes, or it's sort of has any disruption, then they're pulled back into an area where they need to be more within the white lines. They need to be more compliant and so on, in order to resume where they were at that stage level that they were at. But really, this organization pulls back some of that support and privileges, and gets people much more focused into, again, what they know works. They don't have to relearn what will work. So the fifth step here is that we need to be flexible. This is dynamic. Not that we need to. The point really isn't here that we don't follow our system, but we need to evolve our system. We need to continue to develop it, so that we, again, our only goal is to enable and empower the desired outcome. So as long as that's our true north as leaders, then we need to have the wisdom to listen. We need to have the wisdom to observe, and we need to have the wisdom to change and evolve. And so that the idea here isn't that whatever you start with is a perfect system. That's not at all the idea. The idea is we're going to evolve to a better and better system as we go. And how that's going to happen is we need to first start with making the team a part of the process. They need to be brought in and understand that, here's where we're trying to accomplish. Here's where we are now. We've got some thoughts. We're going to institute a process here, but we know it's not perfect, and it's critically important that you give us feedback, and our only goal in this is your success. And so that's why we're doing this. This is what we're hoping to accomplish, and so please give us feedback, and there needs to be a way for people to give feedback, and it may be regular meetings, it may be being very solicitous in terms of understanding how things are going, what people see, and so on. And again, we've instituted this in several different organizations and have seen incredible results, but it comes from the wisdom of saying, I don't have all the answers. I know where we want to get to. I'm really clear about that. We probably have built something that's 50% there, or 60 or 70% there. We're 100% sure it's not 100% right. So we need you to help us tune it so it's effective. And again, our only goal is your success. And so we want to be nimble. No matter what our size is, we need to be nimble. We need to be, to have the wisdom to change and evolve, not to necessarily change and evolve in a way that is incongruent with the outcomes we want, but to change and evolve in a way that helps us find a better path to New York. And we know there are going to be better roads, there's going to be better processes, better paths, and we just need to continue to evolve our understanding. You kind of imagine when somebody first went from Connecticut to New York, that first day, right? There wasn't a very good path. In fact, there wasn't a path, and they had to find a way. Maybe they followed the coast, or whatever they did. They attempted something, and the next time, there was the beginning of a path, and before you know it, there was a path, and then there was a dirt road, and then it evolved. And that's exactly what we need to think about: is how do we, again, we're going to get to that destination. We want to continue to find a better way, a more effective way, an easier way, so that others can get to that destination and maybe go beyond. Maybe they'll go to New Jersey or Maryland or wherever. that's awesome. And that's our real number one job as leaders, is to help others be successful. And so, it's funny, I looked at a ton of leadership quotes, and there many of them sound the same, but this one from Ralph Nader is just awesome. And it's I think absolutely huge. So I start with the premise that the function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. So, the goal here is to really empower people, to help them be able to self-determine, make their own decisions, and be able to self-actualize in whatever place we have them in, so that they can get to those places. And then this other quote from Mr. Cirrus is, anyone can hold the helm in the sea, when the sea is calm. Absolutely true. And so the idea here is that, whether the sea is calm or it's tumultuous, and there are big waves and there's a big storm, and I know from some of the questions that were posed, some of you are in seas that aren't calm. This is really about having the will to make those decisions, and to reinforce what we're doing, why we're doing it, whether the seas are calm or they're not. And again, that's the quality of great leadership, is when leaders have the will to understand and not need to relearn the fundamentals. We need to get others to learn and embrace the fundamentals so that we can help them succeed. So we're going to hop to your questions. But before we do, there's one announcement I want to make, and that is for our next webinar. It's going to be on Tuesday, May 24th. It's called Mentor Mayhem, and it's going to be just a wonderful workshop, and it's going to be really helping us all understand, how do we help mentors, and how do we build, whether it's mentors in our organization, or if we have a mentor organization or a mentor pool in our organization, how do we help them be really successful and, in fact, create the outcomes that we are hoping for? And so we're involved in a variety of activities with mentor organizations. We're actually building a statewide cooperative for mentors. So we see a lot of what's going on in this space, and we'd be happy to share some of the best practices we see. So let's go on to your questions, and I'm going to, now that we can see the questions, I've actually got them on a second screen here. So I'm going to go out of this screen share and come back on the screen here in a second, so you can see me and I can see you. 1 second here, I'm just switching back to that. So hi again. Hope you all are well and are enjoying this. So let's go to the questions, and I apologize. I'm going to turn here just to read these as we go through them. And again, feel free to submit others. You're more than welcome to. So the first question is, how do I build a team with minimal resources? And so, it's funny. Again, we work with a lot of organizations. I haven't yet talked to an organization that said they have an abundance of resources. I think most are operating in a somewhat constrained environment where they need to allocate resources very judiciously. And so, I think the way we're going to build a team with minimal resources is first and foremost by engaging the team. I think we need to make sure that we are clear and transparent, and get them involved. One of the bullets that I actually didn't hit on, but I think is really important, is the idea of self-measurement. There's no better way, that at least that we found, to get people involved than to have them self-measure. If they're able to, it's funny, most organizations think they need to provide the measurements, and maybe they'll provide, my view, I think you provide what needs to get measured. But I think if you have people self-measure and report, then they become much more fluent in the measurements, and so they know how it's measured. They are able to understand when measurements go down, what the variables are, what the components are, and when measurements go up, they understand what happened. And otherwise, it's an abstract concept. And so, I'd say the first thing to do is to engage the team, to get them involved, and that will very much help and again, it's really, as Ralph Nader said, it's about how do we create more leaders, not how do we create more followers. So let's go on to the second question here. And I should say, as I'm getting into these, obviously I'm reading these and I'm interpreting them. So I'm sure I'm not going to interpret everyone exactly as they were intended. So please, let's have some post conversations. We're more than happy to go into detail on any of these with any of you. So the next question is, how do you know when to delegate and when to get it done yourself? I would say delegate, delegate, delegate. I think there are a lot of examples of where organizations and leaders do at their own peril. And so I'll give you an example. Let's just take a sales team as an example where, maybe a manager is riding along with a sales rep, and the intention of this day was that the sales manager would observe and the sales rep would perform. Well, they get to their first appointment and the manager sees that things, the rep is missing some things. And so, the manager, sits on it for a few minutes, but before you know it, the manager's taken over the meeting and now is running the meeting. And so there are a couple of things that happen when that happens. And this is assuming that there's been the appropriate amount of training and whatnot. But, the manager doesn't know what the rep knew about the account before they walked in, likely. They don't know any of the background and history. They don't know what the rep was going to say. And so if we don't allow the performance to continue, unless there's some danger in this, right? But, sometimes as leaders and as managers, we have such incredible scarcity mentality that we lose the teaching and learning opportunity. And so what we generally, and again, this is situational, we see as the best practice is to give people enough leash to learn. And we have to allow them to perform completely. Let them take it to what they think is the conclusion, and then we can give them feedback and comment. And it can be a situation where we just simply ask them questions. We don't have to tell them our opinion, but we ask them, gosh, we could ask a lot of Socratic questions where we could help them discover a better way to perform. And again, this is situational. There are a variety of ways to do this, but the point really is that if we take over, if we just do it, then we're going to end up creating a lot of followers where we end up having to be a task manager. We have to give people lists. And we want people to know the true north and to be able to understand the path to get there. Whether they've been to New York or not, they know how to navigate there because New York is such a clear destination. They can find the way. And the standards of the organization are so clear that they can find the way. That's really where we want to get to. Again, you don't go from, it's not an on-off switch, it's more of a dimmer switch. We're going to ratchet, we're going to sort of move the organization towards this sort of outcome. The next question, how do I get team members, which are volunteers, to be productive? I think it's the same way. I think you want to engage them in the process. You want to really understand number one, their goals, and then where possible, align those goals with the outcomes of the organization or the desired outcomes of the organization, and help them mature those what they're doing to find success. But if we don't understand what people want, particularly volunteers, if we don't understand what motivates them, what excites them, then it's probably unlikely that we'll get them to perform at a level that we want. So the first thing is to invest in them, to understand them. And the more we can empower them, the more we can give them responsibility, as long as they're ready for it and they want it, the better. And I run a few volunteer organizations, and the thing that I've found really remarkable in terms of how it works is, as we have things as a full group that we want to do, asking who would like to own it is a pretty cool thing. We break off. We have two sort of structures we work with. We either have committees or we have teams. And committees we look at as permanent structures. They are sort of evergreen. They are foundational to the organization in terms of our operation. And then teams are temporarily formed to solve something, to do something. And so once they've done that or solved that or researched that, then the team dissolves. And so it's sort of a temporary formation. And so I would suggest that when you need a team, form a team and ask someone, who'd like to lead this, who'd like to be a part of this, and you'd be amazed at who opts in and how you can get people engaged. And you're actually going to find that you're developing the next set of leaders you need, and people that could then maybe run the committees, maybe be officers or whatever you need. But if you can use that sort of temporary team environment to get people engaged and involved, it can be pretty powerful. And again, you can see how people perform in a very low risk way, and then find your future leaders. So let's look at the next question, kind of a long one here. So let me just read it off and then we'll hop into it. So we're currently experiencing a management challenge. We're executing at a high volume and at an incredibly fast pace, which leaves very little time to actually coach or manage. This has created low team morale and lowered performance quality. How do you reprioritize without completely derailing your team? How do you boost morale while you're still in the trenches? How do you create leaders at both the bottom and the top of the organization? I think some of what we've talked about probably speaks to this. I think, ultimately, all of us are in motion, right? So this is about how do we build the vehicle while we're driving it, and sometimes we need to go back to go forward, and I'm more than happy to have some conversation offline specifically about this, but it may be that it makes sense to, for a short period of time, do a little bit less, have simpler and lower organizational objectives to get sort of things back on track, infrastructurally and so on. Then that may not be practical, but that may be one option. The other is, certainly having a team meeting or a series of team meetings, but where you're very clear and very transparent about kind of where the organization is, kind of what challenge you're having, and some thoughts about how to get things back on track. And then of course engaging people in the process of how do we get there, where are the challenges, how do we eliminate some of these, how do we sort of get you involved, because it's your success is not going to come without the people that work for you and with you having success. So that's the first thing to focus on, is how do we help them be successful. Leaders need to lead, and the more time they spend doing, the less will get done. And in fact, the less they'll empower the people that are in their organization, and they'll never find the future leaders. Those people will stay hidden, and that's a real challenge. So the last question here, how do we leverage additional resources beyond your direct control? So I think a lot of what we said probably leads into this, but it's really going to start from first assessing what resources you have, where your gaps are, then leveraging them. It's going to vary a bit based on organization. It may be requisitioning, it may be applying for, it also may be having some charismatic influence that causes that to happen. Developing and leveraging your network is certainly another way to leverage additional resources. But it may be, again, a lot of us try to shoulder the burden of resource acquisition all on our own. Again, if we engage our team, they're going to help us discover maybe either that we don't need that resource, another way to acquire that resource. But if we're trying to solve all this stuff on our own, that'll be challenging. So if we get people involved, get their help in terms of figuring out the best path, most efficient and effective path forward, then we're going to be in good shape. So Wow, we've just went just slightly over the hour mark, and I apologize for that. There's such a wide variety of great content and great questions. That covers the questions we have for now. This webinar has been recorded. We're going to share that with you. We'd certainly be glad to have additional conversations with anyone whose questions weren't completely answered or would like to talk more on this topic. We'd also be glad to share more about what we're doing with you, and would absolutely be tickled to learn more about what you're doing and what attracted you to this topic. So with that, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and we're on a Friday right now, so I hope you have a great weekend. And until the next time, we look forward to talking to you soon, and hearing all the great success stories from you. All right, have a great day. Bye for now.